Welcome to Secure Freedom Radio. This is Frank Gaffney, your host and guide for what I think of as an intelligence briefing on the war for the free world. Of course, one of the most important frontline states in that war is the state of Israel. It is particularly in the crosshairs at the moment as a result of what I call the Obama bomb deal, the arrangement President Obama has just conjured up with the Iranian government and other nations to facilitate a nuclear weapon in the hands of the most dangerous regime, both to Israel and, I'm afraid, to freedom-loving people more generally, including those of us in the United States. Here to discuss it is an ambassador of Israel, a man who has distinguished himself in his service to his country and, I think, to, again, freedom-loving people more generally, notably during his time as Israel's counselor to the United States Congress. He has been a friend of mine for many years and is a very, very valued guest here at Secure Freedom Radio. Ambassador Yoram Ettinger, welcome back, sir.
Thank you very much.
I guess we ought to start with just an overall assessment of the deal. As you see it, Mr. Ambassador, this is something that has been in the works for some time. It came together under extraordinary and, I think, fraught circumstances. What has been produced by the U.S. negotiating team, primarily, and its partners?
Well, it seems to me that the bottom line of the negotiation process, and especially the final agreement, suggests that the worldview of President Jimmy Carter is alive and well at the White House. Some of us remember Jimmy Carter's facilitating the rise of the Ayatollahs to power in Tehran by stabbing the back of the Shah of Iran. Those days, the policemen, the U.S. policemen of the Gulf, in 2015, the U.S. stabbed the back of the opposition in Iran, catapulting the Ayatollahs to an unprecedented level at home, as well as regionally and globally. But as far as the worldview which underlines the negotiation agreement, this is exactly a replica of Jimmy Carter resuscitated. We're talking about negotiation and agreement which signify a victory to multilateralism over unilateral U.S. national security action, and multilateralism means the UN, the Europeans. We're talking about an arena which has never been the home court of America's interest. We're talking about a very significant erosion of U.S. confidence in its own moral and strategic exceptionalism or high ground. We're talking about a U.S. which undermines, miscomprehends the threat posed to the U.S. by rogue regime, currently Iran, and we're also talking about an unprecedented collapse of the U.S. power projection and posture of deterrence, in fact, to a level lower than the breakdown of U.S. power projection during the Carter's era. In other words, this is a big victory for rogue regimes in Tehran, all over the world, and a major defeat to the cause of global stability in general and U.S. role in global affairs in particular.
Yeah, I think the parallel between President Obama and President Carter is very apt, Mr. Ambassador, on a lot of different levels. And as you say, it's not just the dismal negotiating conduct, it's also the hollowing out of the military. It is also the strained relations with our allies and friends around the world and the increasing lack of confidence they have in our reliability to stand with them. Let me ask you about a couple of particulars. It must be the case for you, certainly it has been for me, that the end game of this deal was a particular spectacle. You have been involved in diplomacy for some time. Were you struck by how bad things got as it became more and more obvious to the Iranians most especially, but I think the world more generally, that the administration wanted this deal very, very badly?
Well, there's no doubt that the U.S. Displayed zeal to conclude the deal, and just like any negotiation, whether negotiation with our own children, negotiation at work, any negotiation, when one party displays zeal, that means defeat. The question is to what extent defeat, but equally disastrous has been the U.S. conduct, which elevated the role of the agreement, which is merely a means to achieve a goal, to the role of a goal. And certainly when you exchange between an agreement, the means, and the goal, this must be at the expense of the real goal. You undermine, you erode, you shave, so to speak, the goal in order to reach an agreement. And last and not least, the U.S. negotiators, in fact, from the President, from Secretary of State, and Wendy Sherman and others, they have been preoccupied. Until today, they're preoccupied with the details of the agreement rather than with the details of the Ayatollah's 36-year track record. And once again, the reason they have chosen to do that, because when one is preoccupied with the real well-documented 36-year track record, you realize that you do not have a legitimate partner to negotiation, because that partner has never complied with any agreement, has always lied during negotiation. And why would somebody assume that this time it's going to be different? And that leads me to another characterization. The administration has displayed the attitude, which was, by the way, again, typical of Jimmy Carter, as it is today with President Obama, the attitude which suggests that rogue regimes are much more amenable to negotiation than to deterrence or than to confrontation, while again the reality and precedents suggest that rogue regimes must see a military option or the threat of military option on the table if you expect them, the rogue regimes, to moderate somehow their nature.
Ambassador Yoram Ettinger is our guest. He formerly served in the Israeli embassy to the United States with responsibility for the relationship with the United States Congress. Also served as a consul general for the southwestern United States during his time in the Foreign Ministry of Israel here in the United States. Mr. Ambassador, one of the things that I think is stunning to most of us, we're going to come back in a second segment and talk a little bit more about the specifics of the deal, but just the general approach of the Obama administration, I think has properly incensed a lot on Capitol Hill, namely the idea that the Congress of the United States should consider in whatever fashion or form it wishes this deal only after the United Nations has blessed it. And, of course, that was predictable given that all of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council were in these negotiations and on board, and most of them are anxious to do business with Iran. When we come back, I'd like to get your sense of what this suggests, again, to a government like yours about perhaps an unraveling of the U.S. constitutional process, which can only augur ill for our relations with our friends as well as our adversaries around the world. That and more with Ambassador Yoram Ettinger of Israel right after this.